The doctor is in. The doctor is in. How are you guys? Dr. Mo is running a little bit late. She's been in surgery all day. We're waiting for her to show up in her scrubs, having, done her day job, which is cutting cancers out of people, which is really an important job to be doing. So we'll see her in a minute. But today we are going to talk about biosimilars. And when I first heard about this topic and it was brought to my attention, I didn't know what it was. So I went to get some help, right? So I called Mo, of course, and Mo kind of described it. And then I started calling around to our doc friends and said, help us with this. And we found some brainiacs to talk about it. So we have our friend Erica, who's going to introduce herself, and our friend Martha today to talk about biosimilars and what we should know about them as breast cancer patients, and what kind of our options are for what they mean in our treatment plan. So Erica, introduce yourself, would you?
Well, my name is Erica Brown. I am a senior clinical pharmacy specialist in hematology and oncology at Houston Methodist Willowbrook Hospital. I've been a clinical specialist for about 15 years, and I've been at my current site for the past 5 to 6 years. I enjoy working with the healthcare team, the physicians, the nurses, all providers, as well as the direct interaction with patients and trying to improve their experience when they're receiving treatments, as well as trying to help them relieve any side effects they are experiencing that's related to their treatment.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I wonder how many Black hospital pharmacists there are in the world.
Probably, I don't know.
And then my good friend Martha, who is doing amazing work on metastatic breast cancer, who is like a trooper in our battle, right?
Yes.
So Martha, introduce yourself.
I'm Martha Carlson, and I'm a patient. Like Ricky just said, I've been living with metastatic breast cancer this is my 7th year in treatment, which is amazing, and I can credit a biologic for that success. And I write and I edit, and I'm involved in being a patient partner in some research projects.
So thank you so much for being here. So I think what we should kind of dive right in, and I think you're Erica's going to show us some slides, but what is a biosimilar? Like, before you put your slides up, like, what does it mean? What does the word mean for a patient?
Well, biosimilar is meaning that it is a biological medication, and
What does that mean? What does that mean? Talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
So biological is a protein, if you're familiar with proteins. It's not your paclitaxel or doxorubicin. It's a protein like Herceptin, and that's similar to Herceptin, and that's why you have Herceptin biosimilars now that have the similar structure, the same mechanism, same risk factors that you would see with Herceptin. So that's what a biosimilar is.
Right. And Herceptin is a chemo drug that's often prescribed for HER2.
Right. It is Herceptin, and its biosimilars are indicated for patients with their tumor is overexpressing the HER2 protein.
Great. So you want to tell us your story? Explain this to us a little more with your slides.
So you want me to go ahead into my slides?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let me share my screen. Let's see.
And we normally don't show slides, but I needed help with this, man.
Okay.
For me.
Okay. So again, I'm going over the use of biosimilars in breast cancer treatments. No, it's not moving. I first like to disclose that I am a co-investigator on a Pfizer NCC and research grant. And for this presentation, I would like to compare the differences and similarities of biosimilars and generics, as well as list the biosimilars that are available for use in breast cancer treatments, as well as provide tools for patient education and monitoring with the use of biosimilars. So you asked why the use of biosimilars. So we all know that there have been advances in the treatment of cancer, especially with the development of monoclonal antibodies like Herceptin. But with these advances, there is associated healthcare costs. So in order for patients to get the benefit of these targeted therapies, there needs to be something in place to lower those costs. And one of them was through the Biologics Price Competition and Innovation Act, which was signed into law in 2010 under the Affordable Care Act. And what this act does, it allows an abbreviated pathway for approval of biosimilars, and that are similar to the original biologic product, and thereby lowering costs of therapy. It also permitted the FDA to approve biological products with the same primary amino acid sequence and mechanism of action as the reference drug, provided that there's no clinically meaningful differences between the reference and the biosimilar drug.
And so can we say it's like a generic? It's like Kleenex versus Walmart.
Right. And so many of the regulatory processes for both your generics and biosimilars are related, but there's just different pathways, because with the generics, you're dealing with a simple chemical structure like paclitaxel or doxorubicin, but with the biologicals, you're dealing with a more complicated structure, which requires a different regulatory pathway for approval. And so when you are in the physician's office, or when you're at the doctor's office and they're talking about, biosimilars, many of them will not say biosimilars. Some of them will probably say it's a generic, because it's easier to explain a generic versus the term biosimilar.
Hello, for the 5-year-old people like me.
There are different terms I'd like to review over. So small molecule drugs, which are your generics, and they are structurally simple. They are used, they are synthesized using predictable chemical manufacturing processes, but they have a lower risk of immunogenicity, meaning they have a lower risk of immune reaction. In contrast to biologicals, which are your proteins, they're more complex in structure, and they are produced to treat a variety of diseases and medical conditions, but they differ as far as how they are produced. They're usually produced in living cell systems such as bacteria, human cell lines, animal cell lines, and plant cell lines. And from there, you have your reference drugs, which are your biological products, or your original biological product that has been FDA approved based on a full complement of safety and effectiveness data, meaning they have gone through preclinical and all your clinical study trials, your phase 1, 2, and 3. In comparison to your biosimilars, they are a highly similar biological product that has no clinically meaningful difference from the existing FDA-approved reference product. And what we mean by no clinically meaningful differences is that there are no differences in terms of safety, purity, and effectiveness. And this is confirmed through human pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic studies, an assessment of clinical immunogenicity, and additional clinical studies where there is at least one clinical trial, either that be a phase 1, 2, or 3, that is required. I don't know if you have any questions on what those terms I just went over. But to compare a reference product to the biosimilar product, you can see on the right-hand side the figure of both products. And you can also see they have the same amino acid sequence, for both, but you will also see there has been a minor variation in that biosimilar product, which makes it not 100% the same structure, but it has been shown to be have the same safety and effectiveness for the same treatment as the reference product. And it also possibly means that there's been no clinically meaningful differences between that biosimilar and the reference product.
So what does that mean for us patients? Like, what do we need to, do we need to know all this science? Like, I didn't know what my chemo drugs were made of. I didn't know what the molecules looked like. I just wanted to fix me, right? Like, are you, I
Right.
didn't know it was working. And I actually kind of embraced the side effects because at least I felt like something was going on in my body. You know what I mean? You hate that, but.
Right. So with the when you're dealing with proteins, whether it be the reference product or the biosimilar product, there's always concern for immunogenicity, meaning there's a high risk of an immune reaction. And so the patients do need to know that they're getting a biosimilar, so they know that there are going to be some changes, and the changes are, you know, especially if you've been on the reference product and now you're being switched to the biosimilar product, they will probably notice that their timing of administration has gone back to the original time of 90 minutes versus the 30 minutes they're getting if they're on a HER2 targeted medication. And that's just because you're just trying to be careful as far as administering these biosimilars, especially for the first time. As well as you are worried about, okay, are we going to see any immune reactions by introducing this biosimilar to the patient? And so that's why, you know, patients do need to know that they are getting a biosimilar.
So when I buy the Bounty paper towels versus the Walmart version, like, it's not like that, right? It's more like I'm getting Bounty for Bounty, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm not
So,
getting a different quality of drug. I'm not getting a different.
Right. It still serves the purpose of
the
paper towel wiping down the mess.
The mess.
Okay.
So it's really not like a generic because the quality is maintained, is my point, right? So I'm not going to worry about losing efficacy or losing.
Right.
I may just have different side effects, but the drug is still going to work for my cancer.
Right.
In a good way, in the right way.
In a good way.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. All right, everybody, I feel better now. I mean, I feel like that's,
and because the new term biosimilars, they are heavily, I would say they are regulated. Even with the biosimilars being on the market, they're still being monitored, you know, post-approval. So there's a constant evaluation of safety of these products. There's a evaluation if, you know, are they still effective? So these are, you know, they're constantly being monitored. And, you know, and as time goes by, you know, everybody feels comfortable. I'm sure they're still going to be monitored like all medications, whether it's a, you know, a small molecule or a protein, medications are still being monitored.
So at the beginning of your treatment, you could be theoretically put on a biosimilar, but not know it, right? Is that possible? Like when you go to
That's
chemo?
possible if
I
you're
in those little bags, right?
Well, it depends on, you know, well, usually, you know, in practice, patients are provided patient education on their treatment plan. But, you know, it may vary from site to site and who is giving the patient education and how much of the patient education are they providing to the patient.
Okay, cool. All right, so what else you got? We got this.
Okay.
Martha, you have any questions?
Okay.
Well,
yes, go ahead.
I just wondered, you know, when you're talking about biosimilars being monitored, does that include like adverse events or patient-reported outcomes? Is that being monitored closely?
Yes. So there's, and I get to it later in the presentation, but they do, there are post-approval monitoring systems. One is where it goes through the FDA, so it's FDA MedWatch, where reporting is through both healthcare providers as well as patients on if they've, if a patient experience a significant adverse event, or if there's a concern that the patient is not, or if the response to the treatment is not what they expect.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So with small molecule drugs and biologicals, so your biologicals are like your proteins, there are a size comparison. So biologicals are larger treatments in comparison to a small molecule, which is represented to aspirin. So you're comparing a size of aspirin, which is about 180 Daltons in comparison to a biological, which exceeds 150,000. So a biological is about 1,000 times larger than your smaller molecule. And also with the biological, it's not as stable in comparison to a small molecule because of the structure of the protein. So a protein is amino acid, but it folds into a secondary structure and then to a unique three-dimensional shape. And this is both for your reference biologicals as well as your biosimilars.
So we don't need to worry about this as a patient.
Okay.
I mean, well, is it gonna hurt more, or like, you know, like?
Yeah. So the main thing to know is that, you know, because of these structural differences, is that, you know, there is concern for that that term I was mentioning before, immunogenicity. Because of that complexity, the patients are at a higher risk of, you know, of an immune allergic reaction in comparison to a patient that's getting something like doxorubicin.
Cool.
Okay. Now this is now this is a more busier slide, and it kind of says the same thing as I mentioned before. The generics are considered your small molecules. Your biosimilars are considered your biological medications. Overall, both of the generics and biosimilars have been developed to lower cost. And then also with biosimilars, as I mentioned before, there is a higher risk of immunogenicity. And as well as this is due to the structure of the medication. And then also equivalence is determined by the FDA for both generics and biosimilars to determine equivalence. And more specifically with the biosimilars, determining not only biosimilarity, but interchangeability with the reference drug. Also, by definition, the generics are pharmaceutically equivalent to the brand reference drug. And so that's why we call them identical, versus with biosimilars, we call them highly similar. And that's just because, you know, of the complicated structures as in producing that complicated structure in living systems. Also, a term to introduce is extrapolation. So with biosimilars, you know, you don't go through all the phase 1, 2, and 3, but you at least need to complete at least one clinical study, whether it be a phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. And so with extrapolation, what this involves is that certain scientific measures need to be met to show that all the indications that are listed for the reference drug can also be applied to the biosimilar.
So it's safe. So they're safe. They're FDA approved. So they're good.
Yeah, and then also the naming. So with the generics, they have this. The generic drug has the same chemical name or the active ingredient as the brand drug, versus with biosimilars, that's not necessarily the case. The biosimilars, and now all new biologics have their own brand name consisting of the same non-brand name, which you can also say like the generic, plus a suffix of 4 lowercase letters. So sometimes you may see the term, like if you're getting one of the Herceptin biosimilars, you may see trastuzumab dash 4 additional small letters. So that will be indicative that you are getting the biosimilar.
Okay.
Okay.
This is really complicated, but
It's complicated.
just a little bit. But I mean, I think the gist is you're
Yeah.
protected, you're safe, you're getting the same efficacy. It's just another option. So
Mhm.
it's almost like, why should we be aware of this? I think there's just, we were just curious because I wanted to talk about it because I had never heard of it. Not that I know, I'm not a scientist for God's sakes, but we just want to make sure our audience knows what they need to know. You know what I mean? Like, what do they need to know? And
Right. Right. And, there are regulatory approval pathways, as I'm showing here. Generics go through their regulatory pathway through the Hatch-Waxman Act, and biologicals, more specifically biosimilars, go through the act I mentioned earlier, which is the Biologics Price Competition and Innovation Act for approval. And it also approves the pathway for interchangeable biosimilars. So as we were mentioning earlier, so with this pathway, it allows the interchangeability between the reference biological drug, in this case would probably be Herceptin, to a biosimilar, which in this case can be Kangenti.
got it.
Okay.
Right. So I'm FDA approved.
Mm-hmm. This is also what I talked about extrapolation before.
Yeah.
So with extrapolation, the bottom line is to provide a process where multiple indications can be added to the biosimilar as listed with a reference drug, and thereby lowering development costs. And by lowering these costs, you are allowing more valuable medications to be accessible to patients. So patients probably want to know why can't they get the Herceptin versus why can't they get the Herceptin and its costs, and that's why we have biosimilars to lower those costs. Do they lower them significantly as what you see with generics? No, but they do lower the cost in comparison to what the original reference drug is.
The patient probably wouldn't even see the impact of cost. Would they normally? I mean, I guess if you have insurance.
Right. So it may correlate. It depends. Right. Depends on the insurance. How much insurance is going to cover. That's always the case. But they will see if they have a copay or if they have an out of pocket. They may see that difference.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. So now to go over some of the biosimilars that are in breast cancer treatment plans. So you're all familiar with Herceptin. Herceptin was FDA approved back in 1998. It does have a large molecular weight of about 150,000 Daltons, and it's produced in mouse cell line. Its mechanism is that it is a monoclonal antibody that inhibits the growth of tumors that overexpress the HER2 protein. It is FDA indicated for HER2 positive breast cancer patients for both early stage and metastatic settings. And it's also been FDA approved for HER2 positive metastatic gastric and gastroesophageal junction cancers. There are 5 biosimilars, are Herceptin biosimilars. This includes Ogivri, Herzuma, Ontruzant, Trizimra, and Kangenti. And you can see the corresponding biosimilar generic name to these biosimilars. And you will notice you have the non-brand name, which is trastuzumab, and it's followed by those 4 lowercase lettering to indicate that it's the biosimilar. What patients should know is that with all the trastuzumab or Herceptin biosimilars, they have demonstrated high similarity to Herceptin through structural and physiochemical analyses, functional and biological analyses, and non-clinical and clinical analyses. So this should be hopefully helpful to your listeners that, this is something that has been extensively reviewed with data. And also the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, NCCN, guidelines for breast cancer and gastric cancer support the use of these Herceptin biosimilars.
And they've been in use in Europe for a while, haven't they?
Some of them, yes. So Europe was, you can say, the pioneer of the initiation of biosimilars. Mm-hmm. And then for other medications utilized in breast cancer treatments are supportive care medications, one being Neupogen. Neupogen was FDA approved back in 1991. It has a mechanism of action of a granulocyte colony stimulating factor that stimulates the bone marrow to produce neutrophils, which is a component of your white blood cells that fight infection.
That's what you take the day after chemo, right?
Right. So filgrastim, Neupogen is one of the shorter acting. It was first on the market in comparison to the Neulasta.
Right.
Because it is a shorter acting, you potentially get more than 1 dose of the Neupogen. In fact, you probably get up to like 14 doses of it. So it's like a daily dose.
I know when I had it like 10 years ago, I got 5 shots every day. And my daughter used to take turns who was going to give me the shot. They were having so much fun. So, I mean, I'm so glad that last to happen because I only had to get 1 shot because it was brutal. They were like, my turn, Mom.
Oh. Oh, goodness. Yeah. And another drug that I'll mention is Neulasta, which is essentially Neupogen, but is longer acting. Yeah. But with the Neupogen, there are 3 biosimilars, Granix, Zarzio, and Nivestim. And again, they have the same format as far as their generic name, except for Granix. And Granix is unique is because it was FDA approved prior to the initiation of that biosimilar, the Biologics Price Competition and Innovation Act. So it didn't really get the term biosimilar. So that's why the name is a little bit different in comparison to the other 2 Neupogen biosimilars. But overall, they are used to prevent chemotherapy-induced neutropenia, meaning there's a lowering of those infection-fighting cells, and it's also used to treat neutropenia. So that may have been one of the reasons they were giving you those 5 days of Neupogen. In comparison, there is Neulasta, which has the same mechanism of filgrastim, but it has a longer duration of effect. Again, it's indicated to prevent chemotherapy-induced neutropenia as well as the treatment of acute radiation exposure. There are 4 Neulasta biosimilars, Fulphila, Udenyca, Zextenzo, and Nivapria. And again, NCCN guidelines support the use of these Neulasta biosimilars. Okay. Now moving to patient education and monitoring. What does the patient need to know about biosimilars? They need to know that biosimilars are safe and effective medications, and they're used to treat many illnesses. With the production of biosimilars, the data is carefully reviewed, as well as there is post-monitoring after FDA approval of these medications. So meaning you're looking at you're continuously looking at efficacy as well as adverse events that can potentially happen with these biosimilars and with any other biological. Patients are expected to have the same benefits and risks as with the brand reference medication, meaning they will benefits will be expected to have the same efficacy or the same effects as what they would see with the brand drug, but also the same adverse, the same common side effects related to that brand reference medication. So for Herceptin, they are expected to have a benefit towards improving their survival through reducing the tumor burden, as well as with Herceptin, as far as risk factors, there's always that risk of effects on the heart. And so patients will continue to be monitored as far as those adverse events. Okay. And with the use of biosimilars, gives a greater access to treatment to improve, and then with this access, there is improvement in costs. For the patient, questions to ask their medical provider when they are potentially going to be getting a biosimilar, or if they're already getting a biosimilar, is to ask, what are biological medications? What is a biosimilar medication? Will they save in money by using a biosimilar? Is it safe to take a biosimilar if they are currently receiving a brand reference drug? And how would they know if they're using a biosimilar? And how are biosimilars different from generics? In regards to monitoring, as mentioned earlier, monitoring is a continuous process of looking at are drugs effective and are drugs safe? Meaning, is there an increase in adverse events being reported, or is there less efficacy or less effectiveness of the medication that has been FDA approved? And so there are post-approval safety monitoring methods. One of them is the spontaneous reporting system, which utilizes the FDA adverse event reporting system called FDA MedWatch, as well as there's also institution-based reporting. And many of these reportings are is based on the volunteer of healthcare providers as well as patients to report either an adverse event, or if there's been or if that product has been shown to be less effective.
And this is the same thing for every drug we take, right? I mean,
Exactly.
different. Okay.
Exactly. Yes. Post-marketing monitoring is very crucial. Even with your reference drug, you have your clinical studies that provide those safety risks. But what we don't know after approval are there additional risks when it's introduced to the public. And so that's why you have a post-marketing where you do a post-marketing reporting, where you do list or you do report that there have been adverse events that were not observed during clinical trials, and those have to be we'll strongly recommend those be reported, so there can be an awareness to other healthcare providers and patients that there are other risks other than what was reported during the clinical trials. Okay. And then there is the second method called active surveillance, which utilizes retrospective analysis of the medical records as well as drug event monitoring. And this is sometimes through surveys of patients identified through the electronic health record where, where there was an adverse event. So to summarize from this presentation or from this information, there is growth in treatments available for cancer care. And this has been, with the improvements, there have been advances, there have been prolonged survival, but with the targeted therapy, there are an association with rising health costs. Therefore, there is a need to make these targeted therapies more accessible to patients. And some of these are through biosimilars, which are biological drugs that have been FDA approved based on their high similarity to the reference drug, and have no clinically meaningful differences in terms of safety and effectiveness. Patient education on biosimilars is strongly recommended, and I strongly recommend to have a conversation with your healthcare provider on the differences of biosimilars to generics to their original reference drug. Post-approval safety monitoring through spontaneous reporting systems and active surveillance is important to ensure safety and effectiveness of biological medications that are being administered to patients.
Wow, this is awesome, Erica. Thank you so much for schooling us.
This is complicated. This was when I was first approached to do biosimilars, my eyebrows went up. I was just like, oh, okay.
You can imagine how I felt. Okay, at least you were a pharmacist to begin with, but thank you for breaking it down for us. Thank you so much. So Martha, tell us the real deal. What's your story?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting when Erica mentions the patient education being strongly recommended, because my own personal experience is that I knew that biosimilars existed. I felt comfortable with them, but
If you knew about it ahead of time, that's pretty awesome.
What?
You knew ahead of time what they were.
Well, like I said, I've been in treatment for 7 years. So I've had a lot of time to educate myself. And I have always been kind of watching more along the lines of what would be coming next for me if I had.
Right.
So because of that, I was aware of the development of the Herceptin biosimilars. And in fact, Erica mentioned, I believe, that they were around, they've been around, but then they didn't really start hitting patients until I think really the last 2 years. And so I knew about it,
okay,
but I was not prepared to be sitting in the chair and suddenly receiving a biosimilar without without a conversation ahead of time with my provider. Yeah. And I do want to mention that I also, in terms of research, I'm part of a grant similar to what Erica is working on through NCCN and Pfizer, but with a different team related to communication.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
We have to, the main thing is that, patient trust in their provider is so important. And even if this is, a highly similar drug, it may not be the drug that you are expecting. And so, you want to be able to have confidence in your treating physician, in your cancer center, in your care. It just, for me, it didn't, I didn't have anxiety around it, but it definitely was not a good event because I wasn't informed ahead of time. So it's crucial.
Yeah.
It's crucial that there be a conversation, that there be an open conversation, because it isn't, it isn't a generic, you know,
Mhm.
I wouldn't have needed an additional observation period if I were getting the exact same drug.
Right.
That's the reality.
Mhm.
And it's nothing.
What chemos is until you're like in it, right? Who wants to know
Mhm.
chemos until you're in it? So,
Mhm.
so, um, you know, I was, we're all like, breast cancer, like what? Right? And then they start throwing all these drugs at you. You have no
Mhm.
idea what people are saying, what they're talking about, and then all this new language. And so the one thing I always say to everybody in every situation is never go to the doctor alone.
Mhm.
There's no way you're going to get,
Yeah.
even when it's regular chemo, you're never going to get all the
Mhm.
information yourself.
Right.
And we don't have the benefit of an Erica who can say, okay, hold on, let me break it down for you.
Right.
And so you need support, you need help. And so thank you so much just for explaining this to us. But, the more, I always say an informed patient makes a better doctor.
Mhm.
We can ask the questions, we can be equipped with what we need,
Mhm.
what we need to know. And at some point too, you only want to know what you really need to know. You don't want to know everything, right? You're like, wait a minute, I'm on brain overload.
I know. I know.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Erica.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm going to say you don't want to have brain overload, but also your physician, your oncologist doesn't realistically, they don't have time to answer every single
They
question,
don't.
that you have. So
Mhm.
you have
Yeah.
to.
They're back walking out the door. By the time you even like get to, oh wait a minute, I had this question, they're gone. So you're right,
Yeah.
prepared. And when you see something new in the conversation, there's no way you're going to get that answer in this meeting. That's gonna have to wait till the next meeting with the doctor. You know what I mean? Like, because you just can't get all the stuff. It's impossible.
Right.
Brilliant. And unless you're a scientist like
Yeah.
you're just not gonna get it. And
Or
tough too.
and then there are, and where I'm at, and throughout the Methodist system is that we do have pharmacists like myself that are in the clinic, and so like you said, the physician is not going to spend hours with the patient, and so they do have their extended healthcare team, either the nurse, the clinical nurse, or somebody like me to go in and talk about the treatment. And if there are additional questions that need to be addressed by the physician, we definitely, before the patient leaves, have those questions addressed. I do I do agree what you were saying is that when you are going to see your oncologist, is that it's good to have somebody with you, because whether it be this is your initial diagnosis or you're starting treatment versus a patient with you've been through this, but there may be a change in treatment just based on you've had recent scans to say, okay, you're going to need additional treatment. And sometimes by patients being in a doctor's office and you're just learning that information, they just they zoom out, they zone out. And it's good to have someone there to actually help capture that information, so the patient won't be frustrated or lack of what is going on with their treatment.
Yeah. I think a lot of times doctors forget that we're sick. Every doctor will, like Dr. Mo, when she says, I'm gonna treat you like my family, but they forget that they're so focused on your cancer that they forget that you may not be feeling great today, that you may have a chemo reaction, that you may, that you're totally mentally out of sorts. And not even realize it. I remember I did a talk to on mental health, and I didn't really realize I was stressed out from my cancer, but I was. And so you walk into these office visits that take whatever 5 or 10 minutes. They throw this information at you, and something like this that it took a good 30 minutes for you to explain it to us. You know what I mean? And I'll never give you 30 minutes, and then you don't feel well too, and you have to digest all this information. So it's interesting because, when you go to CVS to pick up a prescription, right, or Walgreens, or really any of the pharma, and the companies like that, it was just ask the pharmacist. So when you get the penicillin or whatever, the allergy medicine,
Mhm.
you can go and like to that little thing, that little booth and say, ask the pharmacist and ask your questions. Well, guess what? With chemo, we don't even know who the pharmacist is.
Oh.
I mean, think about it. You don't go to a pharmacist to pick up the stuff, right? You don't know. So you have no opportunity to have that conversation to help you understand it outside of the doctor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So thank you for what you do, but you know, it's something that we need to know about. So
Mhm.
we appreciate you.
Well, hopefully we can get more pharmacists into the clinics and
I
hopefully we
know.
won't have these conversations. We won't have these conversations.
I know you guys should like walk around the chemo floor, you know, and like talk
Yeah.
to people.
Yes. And go ahead.
You inspired me actually, Erica, because I have treatment on Friday, and
Okay.
the pharmacy that, you know, put together the drugs, defrost them, whatever has to happen, they always have half the door open. And I wonder if it's possible to like say hello, or, you know,
Yeah.
if I have questions, if I could go
Mhm.
to them directly. You know, I had actually never considered that. So until I heard you talking about your role in the hospital.
Yeah, most definitely. So with for the staff pharmacist, definitely, you know, you're with the nurse. So if you have a pharmacy question, or you know, you want to meet the pharmacist, I'm sure you know there, you know, that link between you and the pharmacist while you're there in the infusion center would be your nurse. So they would, I'm sure they would definitely help you to, you know, for you to be introduced to the pharmacist and for any questions that you have that can be answered.
Yeah, and I never thought about even talking to the pharmacist until now. But why not? I mean, we do it for everything else that we, you know, or the other drugs that we get. So it would be good to understand the science. But I mean, we're so focused on, are you going to fix my cancer?
Yeah.
You know, like, is this going to keep me alive?
Right.
And, you know, just sort of the basic questions of why you're, you know, the basic kind of cancer issues, right? Like, how long is this going to work? If it doesn't, what's going to happen next? To your point, Martha, what do I do next? Right? Well, we're sort of focused on that it's hard to really understand the science and what it's actually doing in my bodies. And we make a lot of assumptions that it is sick, but now we know, you know, so thank you for explaining that to us. Yeah.
There is a place called the Research Advocacy Network that has some, you know, pretty patient-friendly information about biosimilars also, that you can go on and just search biosimilars if somebody listening wants, like, you know, to review what you went over, Erica, or you know, just kind of learn more.
Yeah, we actually found a little bit of information on the Komen website and on the breastcancer.org website, but it seemed that it was a bit outdated. It was a few years old. So we are actually, after this episode, we will take your PowerPoint, if you're with your permission, like an article that we can put on blackdoctor.org's website. So when people do a search for biosimilars and breast cancer, they'll be able to find, you know, all the information that you've shared today and even link to this conversation. So we'll hope to update what's available, because I think that, you know, you told us a lot more than I read on those two websites, you know, a few hours ago trying to get educated. So, if we can update the information for people so they'll have a place to go and you know, we can link from our website. We'll also post it on our social media so that people can have access and understand what they're dealing with. So
that's good.
It was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Really great, really great. Any more questions? I'm just looking in the chat to see if we have any questions in the chat. Just everybody saying, oh, this is a good comment. FDA doesn't mean good. It means they know, and the information is available. They're not liable for a lack of self-destruction. That's pretty great. But I think that people are just interested to know about biosimilars and something that we didn't know about in our repertoire of treatment options. So if you guys have any more questions, don't hesitate to email us. You know how to reach me, Ricky at touchbbca.org, and I'll put that in the chat. And then Erica, how can people reach you if they want to find out information? Are you accessible?
I can provide my email address for my work email address to you, and you can post it.
We'll put it in the comments. We'll put it in the comments for people.
Okay. Oh.
And then Martha, tell
Yes.
us what you do. Like, you do so much. So
I write for Cure magazine as like a regular voices contributor for Patient Voices. And I do, like I said, this NCCN Pfizer funded research. It started off as not being funded by them, and it was due to my own experience, reaching out. Did anyone else have this kind of experience with biosimilars and not having communication? And I also am involved in something called Become, which is through the Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance, about clinical trials and Black women and men with metastatic breast cancer, which is being led by an advocate, Stephanie Walker, which
she's been on our show a couple times, our Steph.
Yeah. It's been just unbelievable to be involved with that. I've learned so much from her, and just being involved in that in that subject area, something I would not have expected to find myself involved in, and I love it. And otherwise, and also I just recently started with the patient-centered dosing initiative, which is about trying to make sure that patients are not being, like how there's a maximum tolerated dose. Like sometimes that is not actually what's needed. You can have fewer side effects at a lower dose. So that's a very kind of like hot topic as well. So that's what I'm doing research wise, which is crazy to say because I am a patient and I have my whole life been involved in writing and editing and am not a scientist. I just, you get thrown into cancer, like you said, Ricky, and you have to
do your research.
Yeah. But this is what a metastatic breast cancer patient looks like. Right?
Yeah.
But thank God for people like Martha who are like fighting like a girl every day. So thank you so much, you guys. So can you take your screen down, your PowerPoint down there for me?
Yes, I can.
You see everybody's face. So we try to be real. I guess Mo probably was in surgery today, and she probably had a surgical emergency. I hope not. She's been telling us every day that her surgeries are getting more and more complicated. Are just more complicated because the tumors are bigger. Because guess what? People didn't get screened during COVID, so they're coming to her with more advanced disease, and she's having to deal with that. And she says a lot of her, her surgeon peers are dealing with the same thing. So we just have to pray for people. And it just talks about the importance of screening. You can't prevent breast cancer, but you have to early detect it. And we cannot let COVID and this craziness going on in this world prevent us from getting our mammograms. So, I can't say that enough, how important it is for you to check your breasts every month, know you're normal, and get your mammograms for those of you who still have boobs like we don't. but my little fake ones are bigger than ones to try to kill me. But I still check them. I still check around and check my lymph nodes. So a couple things coming up before we end the show. Do you see my T-shirt? So it is our Touch anniversary. It was June 15th. We're having a big party in DC. I put the link to the tickets in the chat. Breasties can come for free. And it's we're gonna have a great party. Thank you for your magic touch, and thanks some of our supporters, our supporter Amgen, who supported this show and supports our show every week. We so appreciate Amgen, our friends there, and Genentech and Gilead are some of our other supporters. And we're gonna have magicians and food trucks and an ice cream truck, and we're gonna dance all night. So come if you're in the DC area, please come. We have a breastie code to get free tickets. Kids are free, breasties are free. And Erica, you should fly up from Texas and enjoy
Yeah.
our party. And then also, we're going to be on Martha's Vineyard for the show on the 25th. So if anyone's going to be on Martha's Vineyard on the 25th and or anywhere and want to take a ferry over from Boston or from Woods Hole, come join us. We're going to do the show live with hopefully do like a focus group talking about living your best life as a breast cancer patient and survivor and talk about survivorship. So come on over, come to Martha's Vineyard. We'll post it on our Facebook page, the location. We'll probably have it at a house on the vineyard. But we're looking forward to having like a live audience and make it really fun.
That sounds really fun.
That sounds good.
Join us. Yeah, I'll put that also in the comments, but the party information is there. So I'm sure Mo will be here next week, but we always try to be real, reliable, relatable information. We try to talk to you like a 5-year-old so you get it like me, like that I'm not. So thank you for humoring our non-scientific brains and giving us tangible information that we can really appreciate. And I so appreciate you, Erica. I so appreciate my breastie Martha. And I wish you lots of breastie love and lots of peaceful and a good rest of your summer. So thank you for being here. And see us next week, same time, same station, 6 o'clock on Plug Dr. on Facebook. Breastie love.
All right.
See you. Thank you.